Disclaimer. The following is a fan-made production. Lorekeeper Studios does not claim to own any of the characters, locations, or scenarios found within the Hyrule Warriors game or the Legend of Zelda series. All such rights are reserved by their respective owners. This production is made out of a love for the stories that have already been told, and we encourage you to support the original products. Thank you, and enjoy the show.
The Angel of Destiny, Episode 1, Psychostorm. Chapter 7, A Second Chance. The following is a continuation of the account residing in Tycalra's journal.
I woke up in a large, open field. A vast, beautiful plain stretched out for as far as I could see, with nothing occupying its space except for a small bed of golden flowers and a single tree planted within it. I looked around to see if there was anyone with me, but I couldn't see any signs of Kronea, my attacker, or anyone else for that matter. Was I dead? No, I couldn't be. Not quite sure of where I was or what I was supposed to do, I got up on my feet and approached the tree in the distance. As I got closer, I noticed that the leaves of the tree were trimmed into a large, perfect sphere. But even stranger than that, there were no visible signs of any branches being cut into that shape. It was almost as if the tree itself had grown that way naturally. Similarly, the bed of flowers was laid out in a perfect circle with the tree planted directly in its center. I stopped underneath it and looked out at my surroundings once again. Sweeping my gaze across the field, I quietly took in the beauty of the world I found myself in. After standing there for just over a minute, I suddenly heard a voice call out to me.
Taken from the hollow earth, a child of time will prove his worth, and though a stranger to his world, the child shall see his fate unfurled. With destiny held in his hand, against the darkness he shall stand, and though at times the child may fall, he shall rise again and heed his call, and by his hands the world shall see the light return, and the darkness be freed.
I looked around, trying to find the source of the strange poem. Based on sound alone, it didn't seem to be coming from any discernible direction, but instead seemed to be feeding information directly to my brain, similar to how I had communicated with Kronea just moments before. After another minute or so, I was about to give up my search when the voice called out to me again, this time giving me one simple command.
Look up.
Hesitantly, following its instruction, I cocked my head upward into the tree to discover that while the outside of the tree's canopy was finely trimmed and smooth, the inside was almost completely hollow. Even more surprising than this, however, was what occupied the expansive interior of the canopy. Clutching the trunk of the tree, staring directly at me, was a large dragon. Caught completely off guard, I tried to take a step back, but instead stumbled and collapsed to the ground. I tried to get back up on my feet, but the beast quickly slithered down the trunk of the tree and began to circle me, trapping me in place. Eventually, the creature stopped in front of me, stretching itself out, allowing me to take in its full glory. Its body was covered from head to toe in glossy green scales which reflected the sun's rays in such a way they appeared as if they were glowing. The beast was also massive, towering several yards above me and forcing me to back up slightly in order to meet its gaze without hurting my neck. When I finally caught sight of its face, I noticed several sharp fangs that protruded out from its closed lips, almost as if they were unevenly spaced within its mouth. I eagerly awaited for it to open its mouth and speak again so that I could catch a glimpse of how its teeth were aligned, but to my surprise, it never did. Instead, I could hear its words echoing within my mind, clear as day, as if it were whispering directly into my head.
Greetings, dreamer. I am Droman, and I have been selected to escort you toward your divine destiny.
I was speechless. There were no words or thoughts that I could recite in response to what had been presented before me. Droman eagerly awaited my response, saying nothing until I addressed it first. After several moments of gathering my thoughts together, I was finally able to utter out a mumbled phrase. What are you?
Regrettably, it is not yet time for me to reveal the answers to inquiries such as those. I am simply here to intervene in your current path, as to ensure your success in this battle.
My head was spinning with all kinds of new information. I felt as though Droman was being completely honest with me in the best way that he could, but ultimately just ended up being needlessly cryptic, almost as if he assumed I knew more than I actually did. What are you talking about? My current path? Ensure my success?
Were you not aware of the unfortunate fate you met at the Angel's Palace?
I stared at him, somewhat wide-eyed, and shook my head. Realizing his mistake, Droman respectfully bowed his head in my direction and breathed what I think was a sigh.
During your battle, you were overtaken by the Dragon Knight. You did not survive that battle. You are dead, Dreamer.
I had no idea what to make of it. I felt fine. I couldn't really be dead, could I? And what if I was really dead? What was this strange field? Is this heaven? Hell? Some strange space in between? Had all of this been for nothing? What would happen to my friends back at the school? What would happen to Kronea? Why had I been brought so far just to die? I fell back onto the flowers behind me, my mind racing and still completely unsure as to what to make of the information I had just received. I wanted to ask more questions, but no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't force my mouth to shape the words to do it, and my thoughts were moving too fast to ask them telepathically. For what felt like hours, I just sat there, staring at nothing, wondering what to do, until everything, all my thoughts, all my words were interrupted by one simple statement.
Do you wish to go back?
My mind halted and clutched onto Droman's words like a life preserver during the most severe storm, as if it was the one thing that was going to keep me sane. For this one brief moment, it was the only thing I was going to let pass through my mind. For this one brief moment, I wasn't going to let anyone or anything take away the hope that came with it. Do I want to go back? Of course I want to go back. There are people who are counting on me and I let them down. But what can I do? I'm dead.
Within the multiverse, there exists a remarkable power. With this power, Kronea's chosen angel may revert the flow of time, even after death, to an earlier point in their lives and change their future without creating paradoxes.
What do I need to do?
That is something I cannot describe to you, as every angel has done it in their own way. You must simply focus your mind and find the part of your soul that contains this hidden power and find out how to use it for yourself.
Gently, I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and tried to focus on everything I had into returning to the Angel's Palace. I let my mind wander to all of the wonderful things I had seen and learned over the past few months. All of the incredible people I had met. I thought of the murals on the walls of the palace, envisioning the many adventures I would have. I thought of Kronea and all the people who still needed my help, and I thought of the mysterious woman in the portrait that I never got to meet, and pondered how our meeting would occur. As if it were some kind of instinct, I stretched out my hand and gently placed it on something that I knew would be there, despite that space being empty just moments before. I didn't get to see what this object was, but as soon as I touched it, it seemed to disappear out from under my hand, and I began to feel a gentle breeze. I opened my eyes and instantly realized that I was back in front of the Angel's Palace, staring down the man who had killed me, both of us without a scratch. The blades of destiny were still slung over my shoulders, resting within their sheaths, waiting to be called upon. I had done it. I had somehow traveled back in time to just moments before our battle started. And this time, I intended to win. Slowly, I drew one of my blades and pointed it at my opponent, attempting to scare him just as I had the first time, while still leaving my other hand free, knowing exactly where and how he would attempt to strike me. As I had anticipated, the confident smile melted from his face into emotion that could only be described as fear. Again, I rushed towards my enemy, swinging down my blade in his direction. Again, he quickly dodged my attack, preparing himself for a counterattack. And again, he swung his pike at me in a way that would just end up hitting me with the blunt end of the weapon. But this time, I was ready for him, and I refused to let my enemy land even a single blow on me. So I reached out and grasped the long hilt of the weapon and held it in place for a brief moment. My opponent looked up at me in shock, but before he could ask any questions about how I predicted his movements, I dropped my blade onto the ground, clutched his arm with my now open hand, and swung his body over my shoulder, slamming him onto the ground and leaving a small crater on the earth. I pulled his pike out of his hand and slashed at the crack in his armor around his elbow, leaving the same scar I had during our first battle, this time from his own weapon. Cheers erupted from my fellow soldiers behind me as I dropped my enemy's weapon, picked up my own, and turned back around to meet them at the temple's entrance. As I approached them, I heard a familiar sound behind me. I stopped in place for a moment, drew my blades, and quickly spun around, swinging the hilt of one of my weapons at the now approaching noise. The Dragon Knight crumpled to the ground, clutching the side of his face with his left hand, which was now transforming from its dragon form back to its regular form. He had already killed me once that way. I wasn't about to let him do it again. Before he had the chance to get back up on his feet, I aimed my blade at his neck. I glared at my opponent one final time, seeing only fear and acceptance in his eyes. He knew he was going to die. I was about to end it right there, getting revenge for what he had done to me. But something inside of me just didn't feel right. For what felt like minutes, I stood there, fighting with myself about what to do with him. Until finally, I found myself able to mutter two small words. "Get out." I sheathed my weapons and watched as the Dragon Knight hurriedly sprouted two scaly wings and flew off beyond the trees. Slowly, I let out a heavy sigh and turned back towards my comrades. After another string of cheers from my fellow soldiers, everyone began packing up all of their belongings in preparation for our trek to meet Link and the others at the Temple of the Sacred Sword. As they worked, I ventured back into the main hall of the Angel's Palace to get one last look at the portrait of my future. I stood in silence for a moment, simply admiring the artistry of the painting, when Kronea joined me on my right.
She's quite beautiful, isn't she?
Yeah, she really is. You know her?
I can't say that I do, but if my impressions are correct, then it won't be very long until we both get to meet her.
I chuckled as I started to turn back towards the temple's entrance. I'm looking forward to it. We both started walking out the front entryway of the palace, simply talking about the events that had just transpired.
How did you defeat the Dragon Knight?
What do you mean? I hit him hard enough that he couldn't hit back.
Not until after he had already killed you. I'm the goddess of time. Did you really think I wouldn't notice a shift in the very force I govern? Not to mention how you knew exactly what he was going to do, and when he was going to do it.
A faint frown crept across my face. I knew I would have to tell her eventually, but after how bad she had made time travel seem, I was hoping I would be able to keep quiet about it for at least a little while. Hesitantly, I recounted my experiences with Droman and how I'd somehow reset the timeline to put myself back in front of the Angel's Palace. Much to my surprise, Kronea didn't seem to be all that upset, instead just listening intently to my story, occasionally nodding or letting out a gentle sigh. Once I had finished, she just stood there for a moment, muttering some sort of phrase that I couldn't understand. Eventually, she looked up and smiled softly and gently placed her hand on my shoulder.
It looks like I chose the right man for the job.
What do you mean? I thought messing with time was a bad thing.
Under normal circumstances, it is. But with what I put them through, I couldn't possibly expect my angels to be able to do their jobs effectively without at least a little bit of help. All of my angels have had to use the same power you did at some point or another. It's practically a necessity with this job. No, the thing that surprises me the most was that one of the dragons introduced it to you themselves. If the dragons are presenting themselves to you, especially this early on, then I know that I made the right choice in who would be my angel.
I smiled at Kronea before turning my gaze back towards the Angel's Palace one final time. I still didn't know everything about what was going on, or what great adventures still awaited me. But I knew one thing for certain. I was given a second chance, and I wasn't about to waste it.